Good morning, students. I hope I'm audible. Good morning, Prateek. आवाज आ रही है ना? Right. Thank you. Good morning. Now, in our previous lecture, we were talking about the Mansabdari system. And we had talked about the objectives behind it. We had talked about its nature or its features. We had discussed the evolution of this administrative system, and we had ended with a question. Kya? Trace the changes in the composition of the Mughal aristocracy under successive emperors. यही क्वेश्चन था ना? सेकंड वाला क्वेश्चन, ट्रेस द चेंजेस इन द composition of the Mughal aristocracy or Mughal Mansabdari under successive emperors. Now we are going to try and address that. कैसे करेंगे? In the introduction, we can start by contextualizing the basis of the organization of the Mughal aristocracy. It was formalized under Akbar through the Mansabdari system. So we can begin by saying that Akbar formalized the organization of the Mughal aristocracy through the Mansabdari system. ठीक है? Then further, we can point out the heterogeneity of the Mughal aristocracy by saying that the Mughal nobility was an extremely diverse one, with both indigenous and foreign sources attesting to its international character. ठीक है? So both foreign as well as indigenous sources have attested to its international character. Further, we can elaborate upon this point. Abul Fazl Nikhil Manucci and Montserrat have observed the presence of Mughal nobles from diverse backgrounds, including, you can further write, Iranis, Turanis, Afghans, Uzbeks, Arabs, Rajputs, Sheikh-zadas or Khanzadas, Deccanis and Marathas. ठीक है? Next, we should point out, however, their composition was not rigid and changed continuously due to various factors. ठीक है? अब किसके बारे में बात करनी चाहिए? इन फैक्टर्स के बारे में बात करनी चाहिए. That is the place we are ending our introduction on. Right? Factors determining the composition of the Mansabdari. Now, what kind of a system was the Mansabdari system? A system based on only merit or a system based on both birth as well as merit? Both birth as well as merit. We should not forget that after all, the Mansabdari system was an instrument used by the empress to integrate the diverse ruling classes of India under the Mughal umbrella of authority. Right? So you can write, while nationality or religion was no bar for entry, and the Mansabdari was open to all, comma, merit or capability was not the only criteria. Sub point. After all, the Mansabdari system was designed to bring India's diverse ruling class under the umbrella of Mughal authority. Therefore, the correct clan or family lineage was the most important criteria. ठीक है, इसके अलावा और क्या फैक्टर्स होंगे? Secondly, the emerging challenges and opportunities with respect to Mughal imperialism were also a major determinant. Determinant of what? Of the composition of the nobility. क्या मतलब हुआ? As the Mughal Empire expanded, the regional nobility of the conquered regions was assimilated. ठीक है? So, as a new territory became part of the Mughal Empire, जो यहाँ की regional nobility होगी, that was incorporated within the Mansabdari. Right? Similarly, some strategic alliances were also prominent in this process. For example, Akbar's policy towards the Rajputs encapsulates this perfectly. Akbar wanted to use the Rajputs as the main foundation of his military strength. Therefore, he had to incorporate them into the nobility, give them high positions, accord them several privileges. Similarly, when the Mughals encroached into the Deccan, they also bought into the military market provided by the Marathas, and this helped them in overcoming their southern rivals Bijapur and Golconda. ठीक है? So these were strategic alliances that also resulted in a major transformation of the entire composition. And finally, who was in charge of admitting new nobles into the Mansabdari system? ये power अकेले किसके हाथ में थी? Emperor के हाथ में. Therefore, the personal leanings of the emperor, the personal tastes of the emperor, his opinions also played a prominent role in the ever-shifting composition of the nobility. Finally, the composition of the nobility was also shaped by the personal tastes, opinions, and leanings of the emperor. ठीक है? Now, out of these three criteria, सबसे ज्यादा important कौन सा रहा होगा? लास्ट वाला. तो हमने लास्ट में क्यों लिखा है उसको? सबसे पहला वाला सबसे important है. ठीक है? That the Mansabdari system was designed to bring India's diverse ruling class under the Mughal umbrella of authority. ठीक? So the Mughal desire to integrate the ruling class under its authority, then thus smoothing the process of imperialism, that was the biggest criteria. Second importance ये होगा that as the Mughal Empire expanded, the regional nobility was incorporated into the Mansabdari system. And finally, least importance होगा इसका the personal leanings of the emperors. Right? Now, next, what do we have to do? With these criteria in mind, let us undertake a survey of the composition of the Mughal aristocracy under different emperors. Okay. Which emperors are we going to talk about? Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. ठीक है. So during the reign of Akbar, the nobility was predominantly foreign. 70% were foreigners. Now, among the foreigners, there were two prominent groups. हमने foreigners के कई सारे groups यहाँ पे नोट किए थे. Iranis, Turanis, Afghans, Uzbeks and Arabs. सबसे prominent इसमें कौन से हैं? The Iranis and Turanis. Now, बिटवीन द ईरानीज एंड तुरानीज आप एक मिनट के लिए सोचिए और बताइए कि ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंस किसकी रही होगी? हु डू यू थिंक अकबर वुड हैव गिवन ग्रेटर प्रोमिनेंस टू, द ईरानीज और द तुरानीज? Akbar himself was of Turkish origin, right? His grandfather was from Fargana, right? Chagtai Turkish उसकी mother tongue थी. So he belonged to the Turani group. तो अब बताओ, would he have favored the Iranis more or the Turanis more? गलत. So it is a little bit counterintuitive, but he favored Iranis over Turanis. Over here, you do not simply have to consider Akbar's lineage, but also the Mughal history before this period. Who was his father? हुमायूं. हुमायूं, ठीक है. हुमायूं के रेन में उसको मदद किसने करी और उसका ऑपोजिशन किसने किया? मदद करी ईरानीज ने, शाह ऑफ ईरान. Humayun returned to India with the help of the Iranis also. Therefore, he was naturally closer to the Iranis. Akbar also inherited this relationship. Secondly, the Turanis, because they came from the same ethnic background as the Mughals, were simply too similar to the Mughals. तो मुगल्स क्या कोशिश कर रहे थे, अकबर क्या कोशिश कर रहा था? टू ट्रांसफॉर्म हिज ऑफिस इनटू अ सबलाइम divine office. But if there are others within the empire who could claim closeness to the throne, closeness to the emperor, that would be a very big threat to the emperor. Okay? And therefore, while Iranis and Turanis both featured prominently within the foreign elements of the Mughal Mansabdari system, it was the Iranis that Akbar favored. Almost all the important officials in the revenue department, in the military department, in provincial administration were Iranis. Turanis the, but they were at relatively lower positions. Their numbers were also lower. This was also partly because of the reason that Akbar believed personally that Iranis are better administrators. ठीक है, तो एक तो ये हो गया. बाकी बचे कितने? 30%. They were इंडियन. अब इंडियंस में कौन कौन थे? राजपूत्स, खत्रीज एंड शेखजादास. ठीक है. Now, among them, who do you think had the most importance for the Mughals under Akbar? Rajputs, and this is also reflected in their predominance among the Indian nobility. Out of the entire Mughal Mansabdari, Rajputs accounted for 22% of the total population. ठीक है. Khatris were used primarily in the revenue department. ठीक है. So after the Rajputs were the Khatris, while the Indian Muslims formed a very small proportion of the Mughal Mansabdari under Akbar. Clear है इतना? Who do you think were the natural enemies of the Mughals in India up to the period of Akbar? Natural enemies कौन थे उनके, जिनसे उन्होंने हिंदुस्तान लिया था? And who were they? Afghans, right? So Afghans, do you think they are going to be promoted in high numbers by Akbar? No, they were largely ignored. They were not inducted within the Mughal Mansabdari in large numbers. However, there is going to be a slight transformation during the second half of Akbar's reign. Second half of Akbar's reign, in 1584-85, he became engaged in a conflict against the ruler of Kabul, Mirza Hakim, who was also his step brother, his half brother. अब उस जगह पे किसका बोलबाला था, किसका इन्फ्लुएंस था? अफगान्स का इन्फ्लुएंस था. Therefore, Akbar was forced to cajole some of the Afghan nobles to his side, and as a result, some Afghans began being inducted into the Mughal hierarchy. Is this clear? तो पहले अकबर के बारे में लिख लेते हैं, then we'll talk about Jahangir, Shahjahan and Aurangzeb. Write down. During Akbar's reign, the Mughal Mansabdari was predominantly of foreign origin. With the Iranis and Turanis being the two most prominent groups. Full stop. Next point. Together, they accounted for roughly 70% of the total aristocratic strength full stop. Next point. Although the Mughals themselves were of the Turani ethnic background, Akbar favored the Iranis due to the following factors. सब पॉइंट करके लिख लो, 1 2 3 करके. Number 1, Akbar was concerned that the Turanis, belonging to the same cultural group as the Mughals, could pose a greater threat, P-O-S-E, could pose a greater threat to the crown, and thus needed to be counterbalanced. Second, it was the Iranis who had assisted the Mughals in retaking the empire of Hindustan during the reign of Humayun. And third, the Iranis were considered to be better administrators by Akbar. By Akbar. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. Afghans, comma, the traditional rivals of the Mughals, were notorious for their rebellious nature. Full stop. As such, they were largely kept away from the inner power circle. Next subpoint. This policy was slightly modified in light of Akbar's conflict with his half brother, Mirza Hakim. The ruler of Kabul. But even now, full stop, the Afghans were generally not considered for higher office. Were generally not considered for higher office. ठीक है, अगला मेन पॉइंट लिखो. Among Indians, Rajputs, Khatris and Sheikh-Zadas were the prominent groups. Full stop. Subpoint. Naturally, the Rajputs were heavily favored due to their strategic, military and economic importance. Military importance तो clear है. The Rajputs were actually, the region of Rajasthan was actually the largest military market in India. Akbar wanted to not destroy Rajput power but incorporate it within the Mughal Empire and use the Rajputs as the sword arm of his empire. Strategic importance क्या होगा? They would counterbalance the influence of these other powerful groups, namely the Iranis and the Turanis. Secondly, they would allow Akbar to adopt a more rational cultural policy, a more broad-based policy towards the nobility. This would also coincide with a more secular religious policy, which would allow him to undermine the role of the ulemas. So the Rajputs were the central pivot of Akbar's despotism. They would be the biggest supporters of Akbar's despotism. बाकी सब उसको अपोज करने की कोशिश करेंगे because it would impinge upon their privileges. But Rajputs को suddenly बहुत बड़ा promotion मिल रहा है, so they would support Akbar. And economic importance क्यों? the region of Rajasthan controlled various trade routes connecting Delhi and Agra to Gujarat, which was the most prominent coastal region of the Mughal Empire at that point of time. So that is why having good relations with the Rajputs was important. Clear? Sub point likho. During Akbar's reign, comma, he showed favor to the which family of Rajputs? Kachwaha family of Rajputs. The Kachwahas were rulers of Amer, right? Raja Man Singh, Raja Bhagwan Das, etc. They were rulers of Amer. Full stop. Next sub point. Rajputs were also given prominent positions including that of Subedar. Further, next sub point. Further, Rajput commanders led the most crucial military campaigns. Can I give an example? Battle of Haldi Ghati mein, the Mughal army was led by Raja Man Singh. Battle of Kabul mein, once again Man Singh and Bhagwan Das were leading the Mughal armies, right? So instead of Irani or Turani commanders, Rajputs were preferred in military affairs. Is this clear? तो ये हो गया during the reign of Akbar. दूसरा कौन है? जहांगीर. जहांगीर मान सिंह को क्या बोलता था? भूखा भेड़िया, बुढ़ा भेड़िया, right? And do you think that he is going to continue the same warm relations that Akbar maintained with the ruling house of Amir, the Kachwahas? नहीं. तो अब इनको काउंटर बैलेंस करने की कोशिश करेगा हुमायूं. And who do you think he is going to counterbalance him with? With some Muslim nobility or some rival Rajput nobles? क्योंकि वहां पे रिलीजियस डिवाइड नहीं आएगा. एंड हुमायूं एंड जहांगीर was also concerned about maintaining the Rajputs as a chief pillar of Mughal authority, right? So in place of the Kachwahas, he began promoting the interests of the Bundelas. ठीक है? And while Jahangir continued to maintain close relations with the Rajputs, there was a composition within the internal composition of the change in the internal composition of the Rajput nobility. ठीक है? एक तो ये हो गया. Secondly, Jahangir was an opium addict. He was also given to the luxuries of life, very lavish lifestyle he used to live. He was also more interested in cultural activities such as architecture or painting. तो ऐसे इंसान के पास स्टेट अफेयर्स को कंट्रोल करने का समय होगा, फुर्सत होगी? नहीं होगी. He was not interested in it. It was in this context that one of his queens became Empress of India. किसकी बात कर रहे हैं हम? नूरजहां की. And do you think that Noor Jahan will be able to survive if she does not surround herself with her loyal followers and well-wishers? नहीं. और सबसे ज्यादा लॉयल और वेल विशर कौन होंगे नूरजहां के? उसके खुद के फैमिली मेंबर्स, हिज क्लोज, हर क्लोज एंड distant relatives. Now, Noor Jahan belonged to which group? She was a lady of Persian origin. तो अब बताओ कि out of all these groups, the number of which group is going to increase the most? Power of which group is going to increase the most? Iranis. ठीक है? So under the influence of Noor Jahan, the Iranis witnessed a significant improvement in their condition. They were already enjoying a privileged position. Their privileges expanded even further. Further, during this period, we can say priorities of the empire were also shifting. While the northwestern frontier had been stabilized to a certain degree, the Mughals were trying to consolidate their empire. और यहाँ पर सबसे मेजर रोल कौन प्ले कर रहा था डिस्टेबलाइज करने में? द सदर्न फ्रंटियर, राइट? सो Akbar had recently conquered Khandesh, and Khandesh के south में there were three powerful sultanates. These were Bijapur, Ahmednagar, and Golconda. Now they were taking the assistance of some local and non-local Afghan elements. तो अब क्या कोशिश करेंगे Mughals? To switch the Afghan loyalty to their sides, right? Similarly, the case with Shekhzadas, वो जो डेक्कनी मुस्लिम सल्तनत से, they were also relying upon the support of Shekhzadas on the periphery of the Mughal Empire, the region boundary on the frontier of their territory, bounding their territory, right? And therefore, Afghans and Shekhzadas also enjoyed a significant improvement in their conditions. Now, one major change with respect to the Rajputs during the reign of Jahangir was that unlike the reign of Akbar, where Rajputs had been given the position of Subedars, during Jahangir's period, Rajputs were not given the position of Subedar, especially after the retirement of Man Singh as governor of Bengal. So 1607 के बाद, during the entire period of Jahangir, no Rajput Subedar was appointed. ठीक है? तो ये changes होंगे during the reign of Jahangir. Write down. During Jahangir's reign, under the influence of Noor Jahan, the number of Iranis within the Mansabdari increased prominently. Within the Mansabdari increased prominently. Full stop. Irani nobles almost completely monopolized high Mughal offices, such as Subedar. सब पॉइंट लिखो. This is because Noor Jahan herself was of Persian stock. Noor Jahan herself was of Persian stock. And wanted to promote Persians to prominent positions. Next main point. In light of the emerging conflict in the Deccan, Jahangir also began promoting Afghans and Sheikhzadas. Full stop. Subpoint. This was due to the concern that these groups may switch allegiance to the Deccani rulers otherwise. Switch allegiance. मतलब हमसे वफादारी छोड़ करके डेक्कनी सुल्तान्स की वफादार हो जाएंगे. स्विच अलीजेंस टू दी डेक्कनी रूलर्स. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट. Jahangir's policy towards the Afghans and Sheikhzadas was partly shaped by his attitude towards the Rajputs. Partly shaped by his attitude towards the Rajputs. Full stop. Subpoint. The Kachwahas had opposed Jahangir's accession to the throne. Jahangir had rebelled against Akbar in 1602 and had set up his parallel court at Allahabad. So Kachwahas were trying to persuade Akbar to eliminate Jahangir. Even when he became ruler, they did not, so they were not in favor of this. Further write down. As such, same point, same subpointment. As such, during Jahangir's reign, Kashwaha influence was counterbalanced by promoting the Bundelas. Counterbalanced by promoting the Bundelas. Next point. Further, Unlike Akbar's reign, the practice of appointing Rajput Subedars was also abandoned. After the removal of Man Singh as governor of Bengal. After the removal of Man Singh as governor of Bengal. ठीक है? So the shifting attitude towards the Afghans and Sheikhzadas should also be understood in this context, that policy towards the Rajputs was changing to a certain degree. ठीक है? Now next ruler कौन है? Shahjahan. Now, during the reign of Shahjahan, the conquest of Ahmednagar became the biggest priority. By this point of time, Jahangir's reign में control over Khandesh, Berar and Balaghat had already been consolidated. Next on the target was Ahmednagar. जो खानदेश बालाघाट बेरार वाला टेरिटरी था उसको एक में कंसोलिडेट करके एक नया सूबा बना दिया गया था known as the Deccan. Jahangir had adopted the practice of promoting Afghans in the frontier regions. एंड यहाँ पे एक अफगान गवर्नर को उसने प्लेस किया. राइट नाउ द अफगान गवर्नर वाज खान जहान लोधी. Right? Now we had already observed during Jahangir's reign that one reason for promoting Afghans was that Jahangir did not want them to switch allegiance to the other side. Right? The ruler of Ahmednagar, Murtaza Nizam Shah, was able to do exactly that. He induced the Mughal governor of the Deccan, Khan Jahan Lodi, to enter into an alliance with him. A matrimonial alliance was also forged, and with the help of the ruler of Ahmednagar, Khan Jahan Lodi rebelled against the Mughals. So the Deccan began slipping out of the grasp of the Mughals. अभी recently consolidate हुआ था और अभी खान जहान लोदी ने धोखा दे दिया. Now, do you think this is going to affect any change in Shah Jahan's attitudes towards the Afghans? From now on, Afghans को trust किया जाएगा? नहीं किया जाएगा. Mughals already believed that the Afghans are untrustworthy, and Khan Jahan Lodi's was simply proof that the Afghans were now showing their true colors. Therefore, the Afghans suddenly fell out of fear. ठीक है? Secondly, because of the emerging conflict with Ahmednagar, एक नए ग्रुप का एंट्री अब शुरू होगा विद इन दी मुगल नोबिलिटी. एंड हु इज दैट? द लोकल मिलिट्री एलिट. तो जैसे नॉर्थ इंडिया में राजपूत थे वैसे ही डेक्कन रीजन में मराठास थे. सो मराठास began being inducted in large numbers. Right? Further, the space that had been vacated by the Afghans, उसको fill करने के लिए some northern nobles, they are going to gain prominence. And who is going to benefit because of this? Rajputs and Persians once again. ठीक है, Rajputs and not Persians, let us say Iranis. And what do you think is going to happen after the conquest of Ahmednagar is completed? जो यहाँ के local nobles हैं, the Deccanese and Afakis, they are also going to be incorporated into the Mughal nobility. So Deccanese and the local Iranis, Afakis the, they were of foreign origin, right? So Deccanese and local Iranis also gained in prominence as a result of this. Further, Rajputs who during the reign of Jahangir had not been entrusted with the positions of provincial governors are suddenly going to regain the favor of the Mughals, and a large number of Rajput governors were appointed during Shahjahan's reign. ठीक है, तो ये चेंजेस क्लियर है, समझ में आया है ये? राइट डाउन शाहजहां, उसमें लिखो one of the most prominent changes was that the Afghans fell out of favor due to the rebellion of the Afghan governor of the Deccan, Khan-e-Jahan Lodi, who had entered into an alliance with Murtaza Nizam Shah, the Sultan of Ahmednagar. Murtaza Nizam Shah, the Sultan of Ahmednagar. Next point. As such, Rajputs and Iranis benefited by occupying the space vacated by the Afghans. By occupying the space vacated by the Afghans. Full stop. Subpoint. The practice of appointing Rajput governors was also revived. Full stop. Next point. Next main point. Due to the emerging conflict with Ahmednagar, the support of the local military elite, that is the Marathas, was enlisted. That is, the Marathas was enlisted. This represented the entry of Marathas into the Mughal Mansabdari. Full stop. Next point. Ultimately, following the conquest of Ahmednagar in 1633, following the conquest of Ahmednagar in 1633, local Deccani and Afaki nobles, the local Deccani and Afaki nobles were also assimilated in large numbers. In large numbers. Full stop. Next subpoint. During Shah Jahan's reign, roughly 28%, of the Mughal Mansabdari was composed of Hindus, with Rajput strength standing at 24%. So as compared to Akbar's reign, the number of Rajputs, proportion of Rajputs had increased, and apart from that, Marathas had been incorporated in significant numbers to constitute roughly 4% of the Mughal nobility. Clear hai itna? And finally, we come to the reign of Aurangzeb. Now, prominent developments in Aurangzeb's reign which prompted a transformation in the composition of nobility: the annexation of Bijapur and Golconda. Now, before this was completed, Aurangzeb is again going to rely upon the support of the local Maratha chiefs, right? So the number of Marathas within the nobility, that is going to increase. And after the conquest of Bijapur and Golconda, the local Deccani and Irani nobles, their proportion is also going to further increase. And finally, because of the rising military needs of the empire is going to become even more dependent upon the support of the Rajputs. So the number of Rajputs is also going to increase. However, Aurangzeb's relationships with the Rajputs is going to be soured with the passage of time, right? 1680s mein there would be a major rebellion by the Rajputs led by the states of Mewar and Marwad, right? And following this, the composition of the Rajput nobility will be altered, right? Now, during the reign of Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, the Rajput state of Marwar, that is Jodhpur, with its ruler Raja Jaswant Singh, had emerged as the chief and most powerful Rajput ally of the Mughals. However, in 1679, after the death of Raja Jaswant Singh, who had died without leaving a male heir, Aurangzeb interfered in the succession dispute at the uh, Gaddi of for the Gaddi of Jodhpur, and this resulted in a rebellion. तो अब बताओ मारवाड़ी राजपूत का नंबर इंक्रीज होगा या डिक्लाइन होगा? डिक्लाइन होगा. In its place, once again, the old forgotten ruling house of Amer is going to be revived, right? So it is in this context that Mirza Raza Jai Singh, the is going to be given a prominent position, and the Kachwahas are going to see a significant improvement in their position within the Mansabdari. Okay. Further, Aurangzeb is also going to continue the practice of appointing Rajputs as Sobedars, like his predecessors. ठीक है, तो ये changes हुए हैं during the reign of Aurangzeb. Write down. The number of Maratha Mansabdars increased under Aurangzeb. In the context of his conflict against Bijapur and Golconda. Next main point. After their annexation in 1686-87, the proportion of Deccani and Irani nobles increased further. Deccani and Irani nobles increased further. Full stop. Next main point. After their annexation in 1686-87, the composition of Deccani and Irani nobles increased further. Full stop. Next main point. Due to the rising military needs of the state, the number of Rajputs also increased. However, following the rebellion of Marwar, they were counterbalanced by the Kachwahas. Full stop. Jai Singh was given a prominent role within the Mughal Empire. मुगलों ने क्या टाइटल दिया? He was given the title of Savai and Mirza. Savai was a traditional title that Mughals used to give out to prominent Hindu nobles. and Mirza was a title that traditionally was reserved for high-ranking Mughal princes. So he was made a prince of the realm almost. ठीक है, मिर्जा राजा जय सिंह बना दिया गया इनको. Now, तो ये changes थे in the Mughal nobility. One more point you can write. During the reign of Aurangzeb, the proportion of Hindu nobles reached its peak. Full stop. They accounted for the proportion of Hindu nobles reached its peak. They accounted for roughly 32% of the total Mansabdari strength. Of the total Mansabdari strength. Despite Aurangzeb's bigoted policy towards Hindus. तो इससे एक और चीज पता लगती है अबाउट औरंगजेब. क्या? जो ट्रेडिशनल व्यूज हैं रिगार्डिंग औरंगजेब्स रिलीजियस पॉलिसी, शुड दे बी बिलीव्ड पॉइंट ब्लैंक और शुड दे बी क्रिटिकली अप्रेज्ड? क्रिटिकल अप्रेजल की जरूरत है, क्योंकि जो परसेप्शन है और जो रियलिटी है उसमें थोड़ा बहुत डिफरेंस जरूर है. ठीक है, तो ऑल्दो नोबडी इज सेइंग दैट औरंगजेब डिड नॉट हैव अ बिगेटेड पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू टुवर्ड्स हिंदूज, ही वाज नॉट गाइडेड बाय रिलीजियस हेट्रेड, बट दैट वाज नॉट हिज ओनली मोटिवेशन. Politics also continued to feature heavily in Aurangzeb's political activities, religious activities. ठीक है, तो ये भी पता लगता है. And finally, conclusion. किस बेसिस पे कंक्लूड कर सकते हैं हम? In this way, the Mughal emperors constantly changed the composition of their nobility to fulfill their higher political objectives. Their higher political objectives. In fact, the Mughal aristocracy emerged as the main pillar of Mughal imperialism. At the same time, क्या हुआ? When the empire began showing signs of decline, it was this aristocracy which played an important role in accelerating its decline, right? So it had emerged as a major pillar of Mughal imperialism because of its composite characteristic, because of its diversity. However, later, when decline set in, the composite Mughal nobility accelerated it. Composite Mughal nobility accelerated it. Clear hai? So this is the answer to that particular question. क्या question था? Trace the changes in the composition of the Mughal aristocracy under successive emperors. Will you be able to consolidate this within 200 words? हो जाएगा. तो यहाँ पर आपको ये वाला जो पोर्शन है इंट्रोडक्शन में when हाँ नहीं सॉरी जो फैक्टर्स वाला पोर्शन है इसको कंसोलिडेट करना पड़ेगा. एंड व्हेन टॉकिंग अबाउट द इंडिविजुअल एम्परर्स you'll have to be more selective. एक लाइन में ही आपको 2-3 पॉइंट्स कवर करने पड़ेंगे, राइट? सो व्हेन टॉकिंग अबाउट द राजपूत अंदर अकबर एक लाइन लिख करके आगे बढ़ोगे. ये हो गया अकबर का मनसबदारी सिस्टम. क्या क्या बचता है? रिलीजियस पॉलिसी, राजपूत पॉलिसी. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल अकबर्स religious policy, right? तो ये बताओ कि what was the basic character of his religious policy? किस लिए अकबर को रिमेंबर किया जाता है? फॉर प्रमोटिंग रिलीजियस हेट्रेड और रिलीजियस पीस. रिलीजियस पीस. His policy was based on religious tolerance. It was based upon the idea of mutual respect. It was based upon the idea of religious freedom. It was based upon the idea of secularism, meaning both the separation of religion and state and religious non-discrimination. As the golden ideal of state policy. It was based upon universalism and communal harmony, right? The idea that all religions are basically proponents of the same truth, and that religious harmony, communal harmony, should be the ideal state of the realm. Okay? That religious hatred, religious conflict must be eliminated. Clear? So these were the basic features of Akbar's religious policy. Now, why do you think Akbar adopted such a religious policy and not a bigoted, exclusive one? Objectives क्या थे? Objectives or factors in shaping Akbar's religious views. What were they? First of all, he had inherited the liberal Mongol traditions. ठीक है? Genghis Khan, although he was a brutal dictator and a brutal imperialist, massacring several millions of people during his wars of conquest, but he allowed for complete religious freedom. The Akbar's policy was also shaped by these Mongol ideals. Secondly, the influence of the liberal Bhakti and Sufi tradition, which was part of the cultural milieu within which Akbar came up, Akbar grew up. Thirdly, the influence of his mother, Hamida Banu Begum, and his chief tutor, Abdul Latif, who both advocated for religious tolerance. Fourthly, the legacy of previous Mughal emperors Babur and Humayun, the relatively liberal traditions established by Babur and Humayun. Fifthly, Akbar wanted his religious policy to reflect the composition of his empire. He did not want to simply be a ruler of the Muslims of India only, his Muslim subjects only. Rather, he wanted to be the universal ruler of all his subjects. So, his political ambitions also shaped his religious views, namely, his desire to broaden the social base of his empire by emerging as the universal ruler of all his subjects. Further, Akbar wanted to create a new standard of royal absolutism or despotism, which would require him to undermine the influence of some entrenched Orthodox Islamic elements, such as the traditional Irani and Turani nobility, as well as the ulema. Therefore, policy of secularism and non-discrimination was important. Akbar wanted to counterbalance the influence of the Irani, Turani, and ulemas by promoting the Rajputs. For that also, a liberal religious policy was advisable. And finally, Akbar's religious policy was also a projection of his imperialistic ambition. He desired to create a large empire by conquering the neighboring regions. And how did he want to do this? By enlisting the support of the Rajputs. Not only would this have transformed a bitter enemy into a loyal Mughal ally, but the Rajputs would also have emerged as the sword arm of the empire. Okay? Further, using his liberal religious policy, Akbar wanted to introduce concepts such as Sulai-Kul, the Deen-e-Ilahi, etc., which would have transformed the office of the emperor from a temporal office into a spiritual office, thus adding another dimension to Akbar's despotism. So, to create or to elevate the office of the emperor into a spiritual institution. Okay? And finally, Akbar realized that if he was not able to secure religious peace, the religious diversity of his empire is going to become a big impediment to his political desires. The economy would suffer due to constant communal conflicts. The polity is going to suffer due to the frequent high frequency of communal rebellions. Right. So to promote political and economic stability, he also adopted a liberal religious policy. इतना क्लियर है? डू यू वांट मी टू डिक्टेट ऑल दीज थिंग्स या फिर समझ में आ जाएगा पढ़ोगे तो? आ जाएगा? विल यू बी इनकॉर्पोरेट इट इनटू एन आंसर? तो क्वेश्चन लिखो. Highlight the features and characteristics, features and objectives of Akbar's religious policy. Ten marks, 150 words. And features and objectives हमने cover कर लिए हैं. Now let us look at the specific details of Akbar's religious policy. The evolution of Akbar's religious policy. Now it may broadly be divided into three phases. Stage 1, from the beginning of his reign, 1556 to 1570. Stage 2, from 1570 to 1582. And third phase, stage 3, from 1582 till the death of Akbar, 1605. Now, during the first phase, while Akbar remained an orthodox Sunni Muslim in his personal conviction, he tried to undo some of the discriminatory policies towards Hindus, since he was concerned about the threat of a Hindu rebellion, and also because he believed that it was harming the religious peace within the empire. During the second stage, Akbar became interested in mystical and spiritual ideas. Thus began a process of intense religious discourse sponsored by the state, after which Akbar came to his own conclusion. So this was a process of experimentation and new, you can say, the creation of a new religious framework. And finally, in stage 3, when the experiments of the second stage backfired, a different approach was adopted by Akbar. ठीक है? So first stage के बारे में पहले बात करते हैं. Phase 1 और stage 1, 1556 to 1570. Write down. During this phase, Akbar remained an orthodox Sunni Muslim in his personal conviction. Full stop. However, he still took some progressive steps to promote religious harmony. क्या क्या किया इसने? Write down. In 1562, sub points में, in 1562, he prohibited the forcible conversion of prisoners of war to Islam. Right? Earlier, the practice was that any non-Muslim soldiers who were captured during wars, they were given two options, either convert or die. अब ये वाला जो practice था, इसने इसको abolish कर दिया. In next point, in 1563, he abolished the much resented pilgrimage tax. क्या था ये pilgrimage tax? Not jizya, Tirth Yatra tax. So it was collected from non-Muslims while performing pilgrimage. So outside major religious centers such as Varanasi और मथुरा, जहाँ पे लोग दूर दूर से आते थे to perform pilgrimage, the Mughal officials before this were collecting a tax. इसने इसको abolish कर दिया. क्यों abolish किया? दो रीजंस दिए इसने. वन रैशनल वाज दैट इट वाज आर्बिट्ररी. इसका कोई लीगल बेसिस नहीं था इस्लामिक लॉ में. इट वाज हैविंग नो फाउंडेशन. फर्दर this was acting as a source of non-uniformity. So it was not uniformly applied on every individual. अमीर हो गरीब हो सेम रेट पे लिया जाता था. सेम fee was charged, right? Secondly, it was not, the rate was also not the same in all regions, right? And thirdly, this was becoming a source of corruption, right? And जो दूसरा ideological reason दिया, first of all, that it did not have any founding in law and no rational basis, it was leading to non-uniformity. And second was that it was preventing people from realizing the true nature of God. So it was a barrier that the state was putting between the human being, between its subjects and their spiritual pursuits. Akbar did not want this, right? So it was abolished. And third, in 1564, he also abolished the jizya. Okay? So these were his prominent actions during the first phase. Stage 2 time period क्या है? 1570 से 1582. Right? Write down. During this period, Akbar became interested in spiritual and mystical ideas and began experimenting with them. And how do you think an emperor is going to experiment with these ideas? By discussing them with learned people, right? In 1575, he established the Ibadat Khana at Fatehpur Sikri. Now, Ibadat Khana ka matlab? Ibadat means worship and Khana is a place or a room. But this was not any place of worship. Rather, it was a place where religious discussions were organized by Akbar between various religious scholars. Write down. It was a space for religious discourse. It was a space for religious discourse. Now, initially, only Islamic scholars were invited to these discussions. लेकिन हुआ क्या? They continued giving very traditional interpretations of the religious philosophy. Akbar soon became disinterested, soon grew bored. कि ये तो मुझे already पता है, इसी पे डाउट हो रहा था, I am becoming interested in other ideas, so इनकी बात सुनकर के कोई फायदा नहीं होगा. Therefore, but soon the doors of the Ibadat Khana were opened to scholars of all religions, including Hinduism, Jainism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Sufism. ठीक है? Now, क्या पता लगता है इससे? That although Akbar may have been personally interested in the ideas of mysticism and spiritualism, there was another reason behind holding these discussions. क्या था वो? His political ambition, fulfilling his political ambition. Now, ultimately, Akbar became disenchanted with the explanations and theories propounded by these scholars. And why was this? Because all of them were lopsided. ठीक है? He considered them to be biased and thus flawed. ठीक है? Now, as a result, in 1579, he took some important decisions. In June of 1579, he read the khutbah in his own name. Right? What is the khutbah? It is the first part of the Friday prayers. So Arabic में usually recital होता है इसका. Who is usually going to read the khutbah? लीड कौन करेगा? इमाम साहब करेंगे या फिर मुएज्जिन करेगा, राइट? Who is a member of the ulema. Now, what was the symbolic importance of Akbar himself reading the khutbah in his own name? He was trying to usurp the position of the उलेमा, राइट, कि ये काम उलेमा का नहीं है, अब से ये काम मेरा है. If I am allowing the ulema to read the khutbah, it is me who is allowing the ulema to do so. Ulema does not have the sovereign authority to do so. पहला नंबर मेरा, दूसरा ulema का. Ulema is having this power because of my pleasure. ठीक है, that is the idea. With this, he tried to usurp the position of the ulema. And in September of 1579, he followed this up by making a proclamation. He proclaimed a decree known as the Mazharnama. What was the effect of this Mazharnama? Akbar proclaimed that since the religious and legal opinions of the religious scholars are flawed, he, that is the emperor, would be the chief interpreter of the faith. ठीक है? And in a single stroke, Akbar placed himself on top of the entire religious as well as judicial hierarchy of the state. Is this clear? Sure. With this, he also adopted titles such as Imam Adil and Insan Kamil. Imam Adil meaning the leader of justice, and Insan Kamil meaning the most rational man. Now, these being titles that were traditionally reserved for the Prophet and the Caliphs, Akbar also transformed the office of the Mughal emperor not only into a secular authority but also into a spiritual institution. Okay? Write down. With this, Akbar attempted to transform his office into a spiritual institution. Into a spiritual institution. ठीक है? So during this phase, हमें क्या element दिख रहा है? That Akbar is using his religious eclecticism, his you can say open-mindedness towards religion through the Ibadat Khana discussions to fulfill his political objectives of undermining the role of the ulema class. Write down. During this phase, comma, therefore, during this phase, therefore, while Akbar tried to propagate the ideas of mysticism and spiritualism through the Ibadat Khana discussions, mysticism and spiritualism through the Ibadat Khana discussions, comma, at the same time, comma, he also relied upon some Islamic institutions to fulfill his political objectives. किस तरह के इस्लामिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस को इसने यूज किया है टू फुलफिल हिज पॉलिटिकल ऑब्जेक्टिव्स, सच एज reading the khutbah in his own name, trying to usurp the position of the ulemas, declaring himself to be the chief interpreter of the faith equal to the caliph, assuming titles that were generally reserved for the prophet of the Islamic faith, right? So these were the Islamic institutions that he used to fulfill his own political objectives. Clear है इतना? The Mazharnama created a huge uproar resulting in a series of fatwas against अकबर. अकबर किसको अंडरमाइन करने की कोशिश कर रहा था? उलेमास को. Ulemas responded by issuing fatwas against him. What was the result? That rebellions broke out against Akbar, and he faced the deepest crisis of his reign. Okay? So these rebellions would be led by the orthodox Muslim nobility and the ulema class. It was further compounded by the invasion of Mirza Hakim, the ruler of Kabul, into Punjab. So Mirza Hakim arrived at Lahore with a force of roughly 15,000 horses, and a long war broke out between Kabul and Delhi, Kabul and the Mughals. Write down. This was further compounded by the conflict against Mirza Hakim And while Mirza Hakim rebelled, इसको इंडिया में सपोर्ट कौन करने पहुंचेगा? Those people who had rebelled against Akbar, right? So many of the orthodox Muslim nobles of Akbar switched their sides towards Mirza Hakim. Clear hai? So this was further compounded by the conflict against Mirza Hakim. Now, in this context, the colonial historian V.A. Smith has called the Mazharnama as the decree of infallibility. As the decree of infallibility. What was Vincent Smith's claim? That through this Mazharnama, Akbar, you can write subpoint karke, according to him, Akbar was attempting to claim equality with the prophet. Equality with the prophet. ठीक है? Subpoint. This was inadvisable and directly contributed to a major political crisis. ठीक है? And thus, this has been seen as a mistake by Vincent Smith, right? Now, what was Vincent Smith depending upon to come up with this interpretation? किसके ऊपर डिपेंड कर रहा था? The writings of contemporary scholars such as Badayuni, the author of the Muntakhab-ul-Tawarikh, the Dastan-e-Mazhab by Mir Dulfikar. Now, Badayuni had written the Muntakhab-ul-Tawarikh in secret and it was published much after Akbar. It was deeply critical of Akbar's liberal religious policy. Badayuni belonged to a section of the Islamic ulama and he was disenchanted with Akbar's religious liberalism. He saw it as a unmitigated favoritism being shown towards Hindus. So he was irritated with this. Dastan-e-Mazhab also interpreted the Mazharnama as a decree of infallibility and criticized Akbar for claiming equality with the Prophet. He also depended upon the writings of Montserrat. He was a Portuguese missionary at Fatehpur Sikri. He was acting as both the Portuguese ambassador as well as the chief Christian missionary in North India at this point of time. He was also frustrated with Akbar because while Akbar had shown interest in Christianity, ultimately he did not convert to Christianity. Therefore, he was also irritated with Akbar's religious liberalism. So, तीनों sources, are they favorable to Akbar or are they critical of Akbar? They are critical of Akbar. They were biased against Akbar. And secondly, scholars such as Vincent Smith किस स्कूल ऑफ हिस्टोरियोग्राफी से बिलोंग करते हैं? Colonial school. What is the general attitude of the colonial school towards the Mughals and specifically towards Akbar? They are highly critical, right? So the colonial school has inherent bias against Akbar. So not only was Smith suffering from inherent colonial historiographic bias against Akbar, he was also basing his interpretation on biased contemporary sources, right? And thus is Smith's interpretation of the Mazharnama as a decree of infallibility objective and valid? No. So it needs to be critically appraised. And upon rational observation, कुछ powerful counter arguments सामने निकल के आते हैं. क्या? First of all, the Mazharnama was introduced by Akbar specifically to undermine the ulema. ठीक है? It was as much a spiritual decree as it was a political one. ठीक है? So it had a heavy political component. Designed to promote royal despotism. And as such, it was not simply a spiritual proclamation. ठीक है? Therefore, the claim that Akbar wanted to position himself as a new prophet in the Islamic world, that is invalid. Akbar therefore had no intention to seek equality with the prophet. ठीक है? Now, as far as the charge of assuming the same titles as the prophet, that is Imam Adil and Insan Kamil, is concerned, Akbar was not the only contemporary ruler to do so. His main political rivals towards the west were the Shah of Persia and the Ottoman Caliph. They had both assumed the same titles. दोनों अपने आप को इंसान कामिल, इमाम आदिल बोलते थे. And therefore, the Mazharnama, which conferred the twin titles of Insan-e-Kamil and Imam-e-Adil upon Akbar, allowed him to claim equality with the Ottoman Caliph and the Shah of Iran, Shah of Persia. ठीक है. Thirdly, what was the reason of the rebellion? Was it because the religious sentiments of Orthodox Muslims had been hurt because of the Mazharnama, or was it because their political interests had been hurt by the Mazharnama? Political interests had been hurt, right? So, thirdly, rebellion against Akbar was more of a political act than a religious one. So, underlying factors were political rather than religious. It was simply given the shape of a religious rebellion due to the initiative of the ulemas who brought out fatwas against Akbar. Okay? Thus, transforming this rebellion into a politico-religious uprising. Clear? Further, you can write. आगे लिखो. Further, Smith, being a colonial historian, suffered from an inherent bias against Akbar. Thus, he was quick to criticize the Mazharnama as a major mistake by Akbar. Second, write down. Further, Smith based his interpretation upon the biased commentary of contemporary scholars such as Badayuni, Mir Dulfikar, and Montserrat, who were frustrated by Akbar's religious liberalism. Thus, Smith's interpretation was bound to be biased. Is this clear? Next point likho. In this context, comma, Akbar's conflict against Mirza Hakim also played a prominent role in shaping the contemporary intellectual opinion about the Mazharnama. About the Mazharnama. Okay? So these were the developments of the third stage, and in 1582, ultimately, the Ibadat Khana discussions were permanently suspended. Okay? So write down. Following the new realization that the opinions of religious scholars were inherently biased, comma, Akbar permanently suspended the Ibadat Khana discussions. The Ibadat Khana discussions. Suspended the Ibadat Khana discussions. Clear? ये हो गए 2 stages. Stage 3. यहाँ पे मेजर चेंज क्या आएगा? The introduction of the दीन इलाही. क्या था ये दीन इलाही? Also known as तौहीद इलाही. Colonial scholars ने बोला that this was a new religion introduced by Akbar. Right? So colonial scholars felt that Akbar's ego had become too large and he was no longer satisfied simply by being a great emperor, a great ruler. Rather, he wanted to emerge as a new prophet and even a new god for his people. So, Deen-e-Ilahi was the new religion introduced by him. However, Deen-e-Ilahi did not fulfill some of the important criteria to qualify as a religion. तो किसी भी ऑर्गेनाइज रिलीजन का अपना एक रिलीजियस वर्क होता है, रिलीजियस बुक होता है, स्क्रिप्चर होता है, लिटरेचर होता है. इट हैड नो स्क्रिप्चर. All such religions, all organized religions also have a particular place of pilgrimage. For example, Islam में Mecca, Medina, Christianity में Rome, Vatican, right? So it had no place of pilgrimage. Every religion impinges upon its followers to observe certain articles of faith, observe certain rituals. For example, in Islam, 5 बार की नमाज पढ़ना, हज करने के लिए जाना. In Christianity, Sunday को mass attend करना, charity करना, these kinds of things, right? But it had no rituals, and all organized religions have a dedicated community of priests. But in the Deen Ilahi, there was no priestly class. And thus, to call the Deen Ilahi a new religion introduced by Akbar would be incorrect. So it was not a new religion. So if it was not a new religion, क्या था ये दीन इलाही? It was Akbar's attempt to create a loyal community of followers who accept Akbar as not only their temporal or secular sovereign, but also their spiritual leader or guide. ठीक है? So it was Akbar's effort to consolidate the Mughal emperor's office as a universal institution. Both spiritual as well as secular authority would be vested in it. Secondly, it was based on the syncretization of the good elements of all religious practices prevalent within the empire, including Hinduism, Islam, Sufism, etc., Jainism. तो इसमें किस तरह के चीजें ऑब्जर्व करनी होंगी और किस तरह के प्रैक्टिसेस एसोसिएटेड थे? ब्रीदिंग एक्सरसाइजेस, vegetarianism, what else? Sun worship, religious tolerance, etc. Right? Further, Akbar had already learned his lesson when he tried to incorporate Islamic institutions to elevate his office as a spiritual institution. Right? क्या हुआ था इसके अगेंस्ट? बैकलैश हुआ था. Therefore, it was Akbar's attempt to undermine the role of religion in state affairs altogether. Okay? Now, because the Mazharnama had brought him into conflict with the ulemas had induced a rebellion against him. अब ये क्या करेगा कि उलेमा's religion इन सबका कोई रोल ही नहीं है. The emperor is above all these considerations. The emperor is the universal ruler and is in direct communion with गॉड, तो कोई भी पर्टिकुलर रिलीजन का कोई रोल नहीं होगा. सो इट वाज अकबर्स अटेम्प्ट टू अंडरमाइन द रोल ऑफ religion altogether. And finally, through this, Akbar wanted to create a platform where the Mansabdars of different religious backgrounds can come onto the same platform and share the same kind of relationship with the emperor. ठीक है? Akbar wanted to establish a personal relationship with nobles of all backgrounds, irrespective of their religion. ठीक है? अब दीन इलाही में होता क्या था? दो स्टेजेस में अ फॉलोअर ऑफ दीन इलाही एक्सेप्टेड इट. इन द फर्स्ट स्टेज एक सिंपल इनिशिएशन सेरेमनी होता था. दोज हु डिजायर्ड टू जॉइन द कम्युनिटी ऑफ दीन इलाही would appear before Akbar, सिजदा पाइबोस वगैरह करेंगे. अकबर would embrace them, give them certain gifts, robes पहनाएगा, कपड़े पहनाएगा, तो एक क्लोक टाइप का पहनाता था, heavily embroidered, गिफ्ट के तौर पर देता था. एंड ही वुड विस्पर द शास्ता इनटू देयर ईयर और तकबीर इनटू देयर, he would whisper into their ear, Allahu Akbar. So this was the initiation ceremony. पहला स्टेज पास हो गया. दूसरे स्टेज में they would once again appear before the emperor and कुछ कस्में खाएंगे. They would say that Akbar is from now on their guru or peer, and they would promise to sacrifice their life, their honor, their family, and even their religion for the sake of their guru, right? So this is what the Deen Ilahi was. नाउ दीन इलाही का कोई क्लर्जी नहीं था, कोई पिलग्रिमेज नहीं था, कोई सेट ऑफ रिचुअल्स नहीं था. दीन इलाही वाज नेवर enforced also. So understandably, the membership of the Deen Ilahi always remained low, and it is because of the lower membership of the Deen Ilahi that a controversy emerged हुआ later on when Vincent Smith called the Deen Ilahi the monumental folly of Akbar, or a monument of Akbar's folly. But that has been reinterpreted. वो जो debate है and the features of the Deen Ilahi that we are going to cover in our next lecture. इतना समझ में आया है ना? चलिए ठीक है. Online students, any doubts? Rutuja? No doubt? All right then. Thank you for your time, guys. I'll see you in our next lecture.